this is where, you're going to see your business fundamentally change. It's not cheating. It's going to be kind of like you said, automating that boring stuff and getting you back to being able to create real value. And the folks who are going to find the most success in this space are going to be the folks who find their relationship with these tools and how it helps them. The folks who ignore it are going to be the ones who are, hurt by this, I believe.
Welcome to the AI CEO podcast, where the future of business is built today. I'm Seema Alexander, founder of Virgent AI, growth strategist, co-chair of DC Startup and Tech Week, and your host. In this podcast, I sit down with CEOs, industry experts, founders, and investors to tackle the big pressing questions on your mind about AI. No hype, no jargon, just insights you need to stay ahead. Now let's dive in. The AI CEO podcast is brought to you by Virgent AI, helping mid-sized businesses accelerate AI adoption safely. Ready to lead with AI? Visit virgent.ai to learn more. Welcome to the first episode of the AI CEO podcast. I'm your host, Seema Alexander, and I can't tell you how excited I am to have you here today. Listen, I think you guys know I've had a podcast from Spaghetti to Growth for 2 seasons. It was an incredible journey interviewing amazing founders, hearing their successes, and really getting into their perspectives on AI. My thought here was to rebrand this podcast because the most important topic right now is AI and business at the intersection of where adoption actually is headed, what CEOs really need to understand, what founders really need to understand. And this podcast, I'm going to be bringing experts. I'm going to be bringing other founders who are in AI. I'm going to be bringing CEOs of companies to let you know where they're at in their journey. It's going to be transparent conversations, no jargon, really allowing you to understand where this AI cycle is, what it means for you. Probably one of the biggest opportunities of a lifetime for many of us. Also comes with a lot of uncertainty, right? So today I'm really excited to have my first guest and also my partner of Virgent AI, where we focus on accelerating AI adoption in businesses and industries, Jesse Alton with me, who's the CEO and my partner. Welcome, Jesse, to the podcast.
Hey, I'm really, really excited to be here.
Oh, I am so excited for you to be on. This has been a conversation that I know that we started at one of our last podcasts during the From Spaghetti to Growth phase. But I think this one is going to be very interesting. We've learned a lot since we've launched Virgent last January 2024, right?
Yep.
We're in 25 right now. Maybe you want to share a little bit about the journey into AI, just specifically maybe thinking about where our paths cross, and then we can talk a little bit about magic and then get into Virgent.
Yeah. So let's see. We met in DC, which is where we're at now.
Yeah.
So that's great. We met in DC, I think 4 or 5 years ago. Goodness. We were at a executive networking group, and these networking groups are kind of hard to read. It's hard to know if it's going to be worth going. And you and I met there, and I think it was just immediately something stood out about you that made me keep your business card and kept it on my desk for a little while. And I remember the first time I called you, I was just like, "Hey, I'm an entrepreneur, and I think I need your help." So I think I'm throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. We had a couple conversations and found that we really like working together, and so I'm super grateful for that and how our paths crossed. Did I miss anything there?
Well, I mean, I think it's who you are, and kind of more of when we first met, I knew you as somebody who developed products, developed software, as somebody here. Your tag is Mr. Metaverse, right? It's always an emerging tech, always in bleeding edge type of technology. And you and Gary Vee were 2 people that exposed me to the world of AI and where things were heading. And part of that journey, when you meet somebody, you just don't know where paths will cross, right? And I think of working together on certain emerging tech projects over the years led us to where you were one of the co-founders of Magic ML.
Yep.
And maybe we speak to that for a few minutes. And then, because I think that's going to speak to a lot of where we, at least for me, I'm a business first versus a technology first entrepreneur. And I think that makes a big difference in our journey and our story. And I want to just emphasize where it came from.
I definitely think that's something that we share, right? I love technology, but definitely consider myself to be business first or user first, which is something you and I talk about a lot. For me, it's all about like, are we solving real problems? Are we creating real value? And I think even the first time you and I started working on something together, we've always started from that foundation. I really like that. I remember in the early days of you and I collaborating, I started being the chair at OMI, the Open Metaverse Interoperability Group. It's a W3C standards body. We create kind of protocols for the wider web to make it interoperable.
Can you maybe just share what interoperability means in
Yeah.
that context? It's gonna
Definitely. So, interoperability is the ability for two platforms or more to be able to exchange data in a way that's compatible. From a user experience, it would be, like if you want a sword in a video game and you want to be able to take that sword with you into another video game. Or if you purchase a avatar or a skin for your avatar in one game, you want to feel like you really own that. Imagine being able to take that with you into other games. So that's kind of what we focus on. It's like a roundtable of indies in the open source community and business owners, which is what led to Magic. Um, and we just choose to work together, and we like working together. Some folks have very differing opinions, whether they like blockchain or hate blockchain. Some people are only open source. Others are strictly building their own business. But by working together and having an open conversation, we've been able to drive change at very least for the broader open collective. So that led to these two founders kind of getting introduced to me that were working on something that was positioned to me as interoperable NPCs or non-player characters for video games. Man, imagine like having a bartender, a barkeep in your that you build. You put all this time into their backstory and you make a nice avatar, and they just serve one little scene in a game, right? And that's it. One level, you only see them once. I love the idea of having this barkeep be interoperable and have it remember me every time I see it, and have it kind of be able to remember me even if it's in another game or another world. So this concept fascinated me. I was like, I have to meet these people. And sure enough, they were some of the earliest kind of builders working with the GPT-2 model. They were really fascinating. And I told them this, look, I'll meet with you every week. As long as you do what you say you will, I'll be back. And we formed a really fast friendship. And about 5 months later, they decided they wanted to make this into a real business and asked me to be a co-founder. I was honored and decided to lean in with them and led product and served as the COO for a year. But the first person I called, of course, was you. Like Seema and I work really well together. You've got to meet Seema. They met you and immediately wanted you on the team as well. So you and I got to spend that whole year kind of working with really amazing technical builders and like geniuses. And the value that we were able to add, I believe, really speaks to kind of how Virgent was formed, right? And
Yeah.
what angle we want to take isn't just slapping AI on something or out there pushing relentlessly some product. We really want to solve real problems, and I think that we got to do that with Magic, and I think that that's what we brought forth us into Virgent.
I think when you started with Magic, it was more of a gaming thing, but it ended up being an artificial intelligence development environment that specialized in this concept of AI agents,
Right.
right? And I think for me, that whole experience was the first time that I was spending time with what I call AI accelerationists and people that are visionaries and like started to talk to me about the power of this technology, what is possible today, where it's headed, and why this is literally going to be bigger than the advent of the internet.
Mhm.
And when I started to understand, like, when you think about an AI agent, and an AI agent really is a automated workflow, it can be autonomous and do tasks like almost human beings can do tasks. That's where the stage of the world is headed, where AI is headed, and so much more beyond that. But I was like, this is a moment in time that is going to change the way that we do life, that is going to change the way we do business,
Mm.
and almost created this major sense of responsibility for me to get the message out, because we were early in the space, and this
Mhm.
is going to have one of the most drastic changes and in terms of a technological revolution of our lifetime. So
Yeah.
maybe speak to that piece, because I think, all businesses pivot, right? So for me, it started off as a gaming thing, and but it really started to lean in more to
Yeah.
an architecture and infrastructure for AI.
Yeah, we were early, right? And I mean, it shouldn't be any surprise, but it's definitely impressive. We were able to partner with Google within 2 months of forming the business, right? We realized we were really onto something and that this wasn't just a trick. And so we actually got invited to come out to Google I/O that year in 2023, right? We were in the room with all of the other players in the space whose tools I use today, technologies and frameworks I use today. So like LangChain was there, and there was folks from Vercel, and that's how I learned about Weaviate and things like Pinecone and Hugging Face. I was just getting early exposure to the tools that builders were actually using to make it work. At this time, yeah, you and I were like, oh my gosh, this is going to change the world, right? And the only folks that were like really plugged in were super technical. And they were building and building, but kind of abandoning experiments because every day a new model would drop or a new tool would drop. But we weren't quite where we are today. There wasn't really major discussion about AI agents so much. People were super fascinated about the fact that you could make pictures or that ChatGPT could make text. So we spent that year kind of thinking through what AI agents, not just what they are going to do, but how you are going to actually create them and how we could make it easier when that light bulb moment goes off for all the other founders and builders out there. Um, so it was kind of like an interesting year because we did a lot of customer discovery. And by the time we would get to the end of the session, right? And some business owner or whoever would be super convinced like AI agents are going to change their life. Their very next question would be, well, can you build this for us?
Hmm.
Right? And we're like, oh no, but we made this great tool, this great platform. It's going to make it so easy for you to build, and that happened a lot. And I think that's when we realized that, okay, so we're right about AI agents coming and they're going to have a significant impact, which obviously we're going to talk about. But being right isn't what pays the bills. It isn't what, wins awards, and it isn't what actually delivers value. Being right is speculative. And so a tremendous opportunity was presented to us, which was, look, a lot of companies are going to realize that they need AI or that they think they need AI, and they're not going to know where to start. Um, and they might wind up hiring a company like McKinsey and walking away with, a license to Microsoft Copilot, wondering how they got into that position. Um, or maybe their company is using some bespoke version of ChatGPT. They're spending an arm and a leg on it, and nobody's actually using it, right? Like these are kind of the problems that we foresaw, and it was a burning enough problem for us to start Virgent. And kind of once again, we were early. It's like now everyone in 2024 is trying to push AI products.
2025.
Last year,
2020.
no,
Oh, in 2024.
everyone in
Sure.
2024 is trying to push AI products and platforms and tearing each other apart over it. And every time ChatGPT would push out a new update, it would make, thousands, if not millions of startups irrelevant overnight. Um, and here we are like AI services are going to be needed, right? So I think once again, we were right. And this time we really positioned ourselves well to be able to help a lot of people. And that's probably my favorite part about what it is that we're doing now and how our kind of origin story brought us here.
Yeah. So in that $15.7 trillion, that has always stuck out as a number to me. And it's something I talk a lot about in my talks when I talk about AI. And that's the economic impact that is AI is going to have by 2030,
Mhm.
right? So I start to think about like just real business things that are happening. And when you think about that number, if AI was a country, it would be the second largest GDP trailing the United States.
Mhm.
That's how much money we're talking about. When you think about something like that, there's going to be major implications in the way that we do business. And so I want to step back because we talked a lot about some parts of the technical pieces of what's coming down or how things are getting powered. We talked about being early at Google. That was like probably the coolest thing when you guys went, and a lot of the people in data and AI were coming to you guys as co-founders to get information on what is an agentic workflow?
Yeah.
What does that look like? They didn't even know, right? And that's just the reality of where that time was a couple years ago. But because of those insights, we knew where things were headed. And it's not just about AI agents, it was about AI automation, just the simplest of automations. We can talk about this, right? What is a narrow AI versus the more complex autonomous sort of agent flow, what's going to go? And then what does the future of business and future of work look like? So for me, as if you're a CEO or somebody in that situation, like there is so much pressure on business leaders today for adoption of AI. And what we kept seeing was like, they don't know what they don't know.
Mhm.
Right. And I think, there is what I like to do during this podcast is start to get people anchored in relevant use cases and sort of the approach to think about, how do you adopt AI the right way, the safe way, right? Because there are a lot of pieces, right? One of the other things I definitely want to share, as we were doing a lot of market research last year, is I talked to a lot of CEOs. You've talked to a lot of C-suite and a lot of founders. And I think, one of the things that people are afraid of when emerging technology starts to come to the forefront is, hey, I want to use the technology. Obviously, this is a real thing. At this point, people know it's a real thing and it's not going away. But they're also afraid of being in the news,
Mhm.
right? Because if you start to use it wrong, just like looking at every emerging tech cycle, by the time the regulations actually come to play, there's going to be a couple companies that they stand out and say, listen, look at these guys. They did it
Right.
all wrong and their stock price is going to, plummet and all the things. So I think for us, we've also, I'm a little older than you, I'll just call it. So I've been through a couple emerging tech cycles, but you've been in the tech space for a while. So like we've seen the patterns and we've seen the opportunities for doing something in a sort of intentional, smart, strategic approach versus just throwing AI at something. And I think
Yeah.
you started to mention that. So maybe talk about from your perspective, if I was a company today and, I was like, all right, I get AI's big. Like, I get it. Now what?
Mhm.
What would you say to them?
Well, there's two ways that you need to look at things, right? Well, there's at least two, but we're going to talk about two. I think there's first and foremost having a good understanding of what your business goals are. Like what is it? What is actually? Let me back up a bit.
Yeah.
What's the problem you're trying to solve?
There you go.
And that's what you come back to over and over again is what problem are we solving? And if it's too complicated of a problem, break it down into smaller Lego piece style problems worth solving. Think where a lot of companies or executives kind of make a mistake is that they mean well. They know in general that AI is needed, and so they want to produce some type of one size fits all, catch all solution, really arbitrarily to check a box to be able to say that their hats in the ring and that we're modern and that we're doing this. It's again, they mean well, but like you said, they don't know what they don't know. So, what problem are you solving? If you don't know what problem you're solving, you don't have to slap AI on anything yet, right? Like get back to some of the basics of running your business, of conducting service design or research, and identify where there's bottlenecks or potential risks or gaps in your processes that you think might be able to be alleviated with some type of automation. That's it. I mean, and that's like me kind of overgeneralizing the fact that every company is unique. They all are going to have their own different mix of who's there doing the work, who the actual end customer is, and what the regulations or the market will bear. So being able to frame problems or name the problem is the first step to any modernization effort. Once you do so, I'll give you an example. Everything else becomes a lot easier, at very least more intentional. So let's say we get a lot of calls that are related to resetting your password. This is very common in government and commercial, right? Tons of calls. They can't get into their account. They need to reset their password. That is a pretty repeatable problem, right? It's not one that you just want to arbitrarily solve for by automating because you're creating new attack vectors for hackers to be able to exploit, to be able to say they got locked out of their account. So you don't want to be lazy in how you solve for this just because you're tired of the burden, but it's a problem worth solving. So framing that as how might we alleviate the burden on our help desk staff who receive too many phone calls related to common problems. that gives you an anchorable problem worth solving. And you could assemble either a cross functional internal team, uh, hire some outside consultants, maybe a mix of both. And that's when you want to start determining what solution might be best for that given problem. And that's where selecting or exploring tools and technologies like AI becomes most relevant. Um,
So can I step back for a few? So what does that mean, right? Like, okay, I hear you in terms of that's a potential problem,
mhm,
right? And I think one of the things that we talk a lot about is how do we help CEOs or just companies identify the highest impact, highest ROI, lowest effort AI
mhm,
opportunities? And what we have found for a lot of companies is, there's still a lot of companies that haven't fully bought in. The senior leaders haven't fully bought into AI strategies. They're not fully comfortable. So what we say is start off in the operational side, sort of the functional side, like think it's sales or marketing or finance. Like let's work on something internal to solve first. So then you can prototype it and test it, play with it inside, feel comfortable, see, like I think people once they start to see, especially generative AI solutioning, like all of a sudden it's like aha, oh shit moments, like this actually works and it
mhm.
works really well. And it's given me so much time back or given me, it becomes like a superpower and augmentation, right?
Yeah.
Versus like, because I don't think people understand truly, and I actually want to step back a little bit. What the heck is AI? What can it actually do for them?
Mhm,
So is there any like can we step back? Like if there was a CEO in the room versus, just being like, this is a technology, this is something that, can enable anything.
mhm.
What are some of the core things that AI can enable today? So when you think about the functional sides, the things that we've been doing.
Yeah. First of all, AI or artificial intelligence is what we refer to as essentially making machines be able to perform what seems to be intelligent tasks, or basically automate repeated tasks. Machine learning is a subset of AI, right? So machine learning is actually kind of being able to train, uh, a model of sorts on a bunch of data to become more relevant. Large language models are a subset of machine learning that are trained on a bunch of text data, a lot of text data. And you can fine tune large language models to be really good or tailored at, performing certain tasks. So that's where you'll hear me talk about things like fine tuning. And so that's now you're at the level of like models, talking about like what model do we want. And that's where I think businesses and executives should really be paying attention, is if you're collecting a lot of data, if you have a ton of users, if you have a lot of employees, if you have volume of any amount of information, what I would recommend looking into is how you can generate your own fine-tuned models, which can in the future accelerate doing tasks, accelerate decision making, but that's tailored on your company's data, your actual customer. Earlier, I was saying every business is different, right? You have a unique mix of who's working on it, unique customer profile, and of course, whatever the market conditions are and regulations and requirements. So when you balance all of that, you get a unique situation. If you have a lot of data, you have a unique opportunity, like to generate your own useful models. If you collect a lot of shopping information about what people are purchasing, you could theoretically generate your own models to predict what is going to go out of stock, this Friday, or how purchasing patterns are generally handled during snowstorms, right? Everyone buys all the milk, the eggs, and toilet paper, even if like the snow doesn't come, right? Being able to anticipate and get in front of that starts with measuring your data, being able to determine the difference between how Giants shoppers react to snowstorms versus Whole Foods shoppers react to snowstorms comes down to them measuring their own data. So there's a really great opportunity there to be able for executives. I think it was important to explain the like tiers to be able to get to what I mean when I say generating your own models off of all that information.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to go much deeper in the data side because I think that's such an important topic for where we are in sort of this, what I consider the the future of modern day business. So we're going to go into that. Maybe we start where people are at, which is generative AI.
Okay.
Right. And most people just know ChatGPT. Most people either have Microsoft Copilot, something like that they're starting to bring to the table and start to use to generate proposals, to generate emails. Like, what are you seeing or what are your thoughts on like that baseline and where companies are at just with that baseline?
Couple things with the baseline. So first, you're going to want some type of policy in place that you probably already have some type of comms policy or how people conduct themselves, represent the company. Just make sure that the usage of AI is accounted for in that, because what you don't want to have happen is AI solves so many problems that your middle management is just kind of yeeting proposals out there, pushing out official documentation with company brand and seal on it that was never really actually touched or manicured by a person. It was a bunch of people saying, yeah, it looks good to me, without revision. Like you want to keep an eye on that. You don't want to stifle innovation or creativity. So having too rigid of policies or forbidding tools too early, it's probably going to hurt you, right? Like you want insights to bubble up about how your people use these tools and technologies, because there might be repeatable exemplars or operating procedures that you're able to scale throughout the org that ultimately save everyone time and money, right? So those are some. The others, let's see, you made me think of another one. What was the question again? Help me out.
No, I was just talking specifically around these, the common models today that people have, right? Because we see a lot of gaps in.
So there's one more. Thank you, Seema. There's one more. You want to make sure that you have a policy in place for your staff who may leave, right? If everybody's using, and you and I talk about this about like shadow AI, right? Or shadow IT and use, which is basically, it's the usage of tools that are not necessarily approved or even known about. Your people want to do great work. And if they find a tool or technology out there that is not expressly forbidden and it helps them get their job done better and it results in a positive outcome, that sounds like a really great thing. However, if they're using tools and technologies that you're not even aware of, you're not really able to turn that into intelligence. You're not able to scale that for everyone else in the org. You don't know where that data lives or how it's getting used or what, how this could affect your business in the future. So yes, you want policies up front, but also on the back end. It's really important that if you can afford it, to have every one of your staff using employee issued licenses. Just like if they leave the company, their Gmail account gets shut down, right? Like you want to be able to do the same thing with ChatGPT or Claude or whatever your company is using. You also don't want to lose that intelligence, right? At the end of the day, if these folks leave, it's not just about them being able to do something nefarious with the work. I don't want to assume negative intent. Let's assume positive intent. But it's about the loss of that intelligence. Like if they created GPTs or which is like Chat GPT's initial version of like a basic reusable agent or chatbot. If they're creating these to get their work done and then they leave and they take that with them, you've lost that intelligence as well. So these are like kind of policy related things that I think folks overlook because they're not having a conversation about their employees' current understanding or tolerance or safety, feeling of safety about these tools. They're just kind of making a decision for the company. Everyone's going to use this corporate version of ChatGPT, and that's that. Boom, done. I did it. And they're leaving so much value on the table.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things here. So when in the beginning, when this next phase of AI came out, there was a lot of C-suite that were like, okay, we can probably like if we automate certain tasks, right? Like call it customer service, call it the things that were sort of at tier 1 level of employment, we could potentially reduce 30% of full-time staff. And that I've heard a lot of like, that was the initial thought process. And what I think people were missing out on was like, those individuals, especially they've been with you a long time, they have the data, they have the knowledge of your company and everything with AI. We talk about the internet was access to information. AI is access to intelligence, right? And it's that intelligence allows you to make decisions that are in precise decisions, precision, predictive, right? Because it's based on actual data, not on assumptions. And people have that data as well. And I think people are starting to realize, like right now, there, with the uncertainty and the unknowns, there's a lot of employees that have, they're concerned. They don't know if they should be using even the technology or the AI because they're afraid that, they're cheating, or they're afraid that if they use it, they may actually be intentionally losing their job because now you can see that they're being more productive, or they're not needed anymore. And I think these are real battles that CEOs and leaders have to really think through. And one of the things that we've been seeing with a lot of our customers is like, how do we convert this conversation of uncertainty and fear to a culture of innovation? Because all of a sudden, if if people actually use the tools and see that it's not taking humans out of the loop per se, but it's becoming your superpower. It's
Mm.
augmenting what you already do, and then it actually opens up human agency. So instead of having to do these laborious tasks all the time, you can focus on, strategic partnerships, creativity, strategy, things that are that next phase of your potential role that you never even get to, right? So I think there's something in that, and I agree with you with governance and policy. I think from the next phase of like automation, I know we touched on AI agents a little bit, but I think I'd love to like define a little bit more of like the narrow AI agent, because this conversation has to do with like the future of work,
Mhm.
right? And like where there's certain tasks right now that are, again, augmentation. But what can you give a little bit more of like what is an AI agent and what does it actually do? And maybe some examples.
Yeah. So an AI agent, I guess you could take it one step further from what we were talking about with language models, right? An AI agent is essentially a semi-autonomous, or it's like, imagine software that is able to perform any other automation. Generally, what makes this different is it also leverages large language models to be able to communicate, take directives, and reason in in the way that we communicate. So that's why when you pair kind of these automation tools that are out there with something like a large language model, and you do so using the right technologies, like some or frameworks like LangChain, um, it's able to result in what feels like a virtual worker, or in a
A
virtual
human doing the
assistant.
work.
It's like, yeah, almost like a human. And I think people have different like expectations. Like when I talk about AI agents, there's some folks out there who are like really thinking about like AGI, right? Which is like this future state that we all want. AGI has tons of different degrees of mental model of definition. Some people think AGI is going to happen this year, or that ChatGPT or OpenAI already have achieved AGI. Other folks think it's not going to happen for another 50 years. What AGI really is kind of the closest thing to the way that we operate and reason. It's like it's able to perform autonomous tasks. It's able to set its own directives based on what the prime directive is. It's able to change its abilities and its access to things on the fly. Like that's what a lot of folks think of. So when I talk about AI agents, let's not conflate it with perfection. Um, I think a best way to think about AI agents is more so like there are task agents. So there's agents that maybe do one thing really well, like manage your email, check your email. And of course, we've already got spam filters. So let's take it one step further. Anything that passes your spam filter, be great if you could have a task agent that's reading your inbox, determining what seems to be worthwhile for you, determining what seems to not be worthwhile, and then taking that step further. It then pre-generates a response for you. If something's related to scheduling, it checks your calendar. It includes potential times and even a link to an invite, and does everything but send it, right? And now you have this queue. This is real. You can do this today, right? There's tutorials. You can do this right now. Now you have a queue of emails that have passed not only your spam filter, but have also passed now this little extension of yourself, right? This little approved, gated, useful piece of value that now has a list of pre-prepared responses, a summary of what the emails are, and all you're doing is saying, "Yep, send that one. Change that. Sure, don't send that. We don't need to meet. Send, send, send." And that becomes your email experience. It's a lot more enjoyable than fishing through the 200 emails, some spam, some newsletters, some useful a day, and feeling this like sense of panic. Like, what if I miss a lead? What if I miss something important? Having a little task agent that can help you with that is a very useful, basic thing you can do today.
And I wanna pause for a second because that's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Just if you think about like how many emails on in general, like, I mean, if you're in a company, you're getting, I don't know, 20, 100, depending on your role, right? But it's like that consistency of having to respond. And like now an AI agent is going to be able to help get you a lot, maybe 90, 80%, 90% there, depending on the types of responses that you're seeking. And so just the productivity side of things, just a level of less frustration side of things. Obviously, it needs to be trained in terms of your brand and your voice. And, some emails are going to be more extensive, but it just changes the way that you do business on
Yep.
an everyday basis. And I think that is a great example of multiple things that can be done in that way. I think like if you're like, for example, in real estate and say you're in commercial and this is just another example and you have to evaluate a portfolio, which business or which building to buy, right? And so then there's an agent kind of scraping the comps and scraping the sort of your own algorithm of what worked and what doesn't work for the box that you're in terms of your thesis and the way that you invest. And it could continue to build off of analysis and tasks that a normal human being would do, but now an agent can do for them. And then all of a sudden, the person on the other end who's the analyst now has all the information in front of them to make a decision based on all the research that's already been done. And that stuff can take a month, right? But now those things, if curated the right way in an AI agent, obviously quality checked and all those things, will take so much time away from the things that we do all the time that take so much time.
Yep.
But I mean, I say this a lot. It's like there's certain parts of people's jobs that they're like, I hate this part of my job, right? And we're taking that part out and just saying, work on the things. Now you have data. Now you have or opportunities to make decisions based on, an augmented piece of you.
And you have more time.
Yeah, and you get more time. You get more
doesn't
time
love
to do
that?
things that matter, right? And do things to help scale and do things that, all of that. So these are really good examples, right? But how does a company get there? Because it's funny, I've been doing a lot of talks, as you know, on this concept of AI is bigger than the ad and the internet, and then going into like examples and getting people to see where we are in the cycle and, this whole crazy time where adoption is so fast compared to any other technological revolution. But when I bring up the words AI agent, a lot of people have no idea that that's like the internet and apps. Now it's going to be AI and AI agents. There are going to be millions of these things. And we're talking about the narrow side. There's going to be collaborations of agents, and we can talk about that in a few minutes. But when do you think that's going to become more of the norm?
I think, yeah, it's a great question. So we're seeing it in many ways become more normal through things like Apple Intelligence, right? I think for most people who aren't even in the tech space or don't work even in the entrepreneurship space, which is probably most people fall in that bucket. Their understanding of AI is this thing called ChatGPT. They might be playing with it, and they can now make emojis with their iPhone, right? But I think that serves a place, is that it's meeting people where they're at and starting to pull them in and call them in. I think as we're seeing some of these features become default features of Gmail and inside of the Apple suite, people are starting to get exposed to how these tools can help them. It's one thing though to have like a generalist tool. It's another when it's specifically trained on you and your preferences. It doesn't send you any alerts before 8 a.m. because you don't like any screen time before that, and it knows that, right? It's able to automatically set your phone to no blue light after sunset, even though you forgot to turn that setting on. It knows that you care about that sort of thing. Like these little personal changes are where people are going to become more, I think, emotionally engaged with the value that they're getting from this type of work. I think where a fear comes from is that like we hear this sometimes that it's like feels like cheating, feels like they're not really putting in the effort. I think that goes away as you start to find your own way of using these tools. And um, what's most important is that you find your way of using these tools. So for folks who are creating emojis right now with Apple Intelligence, I'm excited that they're creating anything with AI powered tools or with generative AI because it's a step forward. But I wouldn't be surprised if, my mom has an AI agent that is managing the shopping list or reminding her of birthdays or any of those things inside of the next 4 years that she's talking to and that she feels like she can trust and that she can tell things. Like I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. For businesses, and you started to get to this earlier, right? For businesses, when you hire a new hire, there's a certain, let's say they're junior, like straight out of like school, right? They've never worked in a company before. There's a minimum amount of criteria that they have to pass before you're going to give them the opportunity. So let's assume that they've passed that minimum amount of criteria. They can check email. They can respond to email. They're going to speak professionally. They're intelligent. But other than that, it remains to be seen. We don't know if they're going to show up on time. We don't know if they can do it with your values. We're giving them a chance. As they spend more time at the company and get more experience, they become more like the flavor of your company. They become more blue, if that's your brand color. They become more, whatever your terminology is.
Ambassadors of your brand.
They really
start
do.
to understand. Yeah.
They respond to emails the way that somebody from your company does, right? Like there's a company called Defense Unicorns. It's local. I talk about them. Folks talk about them because their marketing is really fun and engaging. And when you meet them in person, everyone's really positive and happy. And it's that sticks. You know what I mean? There's so many like companies in the area that build software and it's hard to really think about them. But when you have one like that that's consistently on brand, they have their own flavor of positivity, you notice. The same is with AI agents. Like, let's start small with something that's able to field your emails, but over time, that thing is we're going to have enough data that it's going to know how you respond to emails. And it's going to know not just that, but what the blue way is of responding to emails. This is where, you're going to see your business fundamentally change. It's not cheating. It's going to be kind of like you said, automating that boring stuff and getting you back to being able to create real value. And the folks who are going to find the most success in this space are going to be the folks who find their relationship with these tools and how it helps them. The folks who ignore it are going to be the ones who are, hurt by this, I believe.
So I'm gonna change the topic a little bit and not so much shift it. Like we've been talking about the first phase of like how do you create an intelligent business, foundations of an intelligent business, and like the future of modern day business. Every business will have to have just a certain level of intelligence. It's just going to be baseline. And what does that mean? That means automations. That means certain types of AI agents. This is the way people work over the next couple of years are going to change right through these processes. But then we started talking about data, and I want to talk about a little bit about competitive edge and innovation with data. So a lot of companies have data today. Some are structured and unstructured data. Unstructured meaning it could be on PDFs or pieces of paper, whatever, right? There's ways now using AI to be able to bring that information together, clean it up, right? And that's the goal, is clean it up, hopefully in a way that is unbiased and ethical, and we can have a whole conversation like as a next phase around AI, responsible AI pieces. But then, using your data to me in ways to be more personalized with your customer, create precision decisions based on the data. You mentioned a couple examples of predictive analytics and stuff, but how do they innovate using data? And you can use any industry that you want, right? Because I think for me, the competitive edge for companies is going to be in their proprietary data sets.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. I'm going to give you all a secret, right, on how the sausage is made. And it sounds easier than it is. So call me when you need me. So first of all, start somewhere, right? Like we talked about. What type of problem are we trying to solve? Let's solve it with the simplest possible implementation so that we can test and get real data and improve it. So this is classic product delivery, right? Don't skip that step. It's important. Once you've found a repeatable task or value creating baseline agent, that's what we'll call it. So our email agent, it's able to field them and determine what should or shouldn't have my attention. And it's able to try to take a crack at writing an email response. That's great. Well, next, what we want to do is have a way of fine tuning this thing, right? Let's say I'm using a off the shelf model from Hugging Face. We'll call it Llama 3B. Let's say that one is what I started with. It was cost efficient. I can self-host it. My data is not going to be leaking upstream or training anyone else's models. And I feel like I can pass some of my more sensitive information into this. Still going to follow best practices on keeping my data clean, but I feel comfortable with it. So it's a starter. This thing starts reading emails, starts drafting responses, but it's not doing anything fancy. Beyond that, where you start to get into really creating real IP is fine-tuning that model based on the data that you're collecting. So how often, how many emails that the email agent queued up did I actually approve each day? Do I approve more than others on certain days of the week? Am I essentially a jerk on Monday versus on Friday? These are all things that for me, myself, I think I know myself, but machine learning in particular is very good at detecting patterns in data. So you need to be collecting and measuring data. Now, you're not going to be able to think of every single thing worth measuring, but make sure that whatever you're pushing out there is being measured. That's it. So whatever your prototype is, make sure we're measuring some type of return. As you do that, you're going to think of more things worth measuring, and you're going to wind up having more and more intelligence. So this all comes down to now volume of data. So you have things that you're measuring, and now over either enough time or enough emails or enough, enough people in your company using it, like eventually you get more data. You get enough data that you could theoretically create your own fine-tuned model. So now what we want to do is take the data of how often I respond, what types of responses I seem to like versus others, what types of responses pass the spam filter that I still determine to be spam. No, you shouldn't even be responding to that. These things go into creating now a new version of that off-the-shelf model. And this one is yours. This one is fine-tuned on your data. This one knows how you like to respond and when you like to respond. Now, you're able to take this model and self-host that. And you can license it out there into the world or keep it as your own proprietary IP of the blue way of doing things, right? Now you have this essentially actionable intelligence, and you continue to fine-tune it in various different ways, whether it's from measuring mass amounts of data and letting machine learning do its thing, or the old-fashioned way of surveying, right? How satisfied are you with it? Right? You can ask, like, how satisfied are you with the quality of my response? Well, you can give it that feedback, right? As long as you keep these parts in the loop, you're able to fine tune and start generating real value. Now, this is a pretty trivial example, but if you work in like something more complex, let's say you build spaceships, right? Being able to have models trained on the way you design your materials and select your materials, being able to train models on how that proprietary fin that you have that people think looks so cool is also actually adding value to the structural integrity of your ship, right? Being able to start setting brand standards and being able to start setting, value standards is one thing. We've seen it all in all other phases of tech. Design systems set a foundation for how a web page is going to look and how a brochure is going to look and how the UI of the app is going to look, and somehow it all looks the same. It's all on brand, right? We have style guides that define that. The style guide of how your company uses AI is what's going to generate the most IP, the highest ROI for you, right?
I think that IP word is the right word,
Yeah.
right? Because I think, going forward, I think an easy example is like medicine. I know it's complicated with PII and a bunch of other things, but being able to use data that's precise to a customer to be able to, let's just make it up, you're in pharma, to decide, hey, this pill is actually going to work for you versus that, because based on all the data that we have accumulated. And again, I'm trying to make it so simple and anchorable, where
Yeah,
it's like
same.
you have, the data is what's going to drive personalization in the way that you deliver your outcomes, that deliver your solutions to your customers. And that's where the customers are, they're not going to know all the stuff that's happening in the background. The service that they receive from you is going to be that holy moly, this is amazing. And that's what is going to change perspective if you use the AI technology the right way.
Mhm.
Nobody cares that it's AI enabled. Nobody cares that, internet is powering this, or, there's blockchain behind something if it works and the outcome is there,
Mhm.
right? And I think this level of personalization is going to be the biggest shift and change and opportunity if companies use AI right with their data,
Mhm.
right? Maybe you could help think through like customer service. I think we've talked a lot about like examples with like chatbots. Traditional chatbots today on websites are so, like mundane. They're Excel spreadsheets with certain queries put in, right?
Mhm.
What is an AI enabled chatbot, and what does the
Yeah.
future of that look like?
Wow, okay, so, yeah, that's actually a great way to, like, explain the complexity, like, the scale too, so good thinking. I think, we've all probably spoken to a chatbot, right? And frankly, the experience of chatting with chatbots or bots is generally very frustrating because the only time I ever really need help that involves me talking to a chatbot is when I'm desperately trying to get in touch with a person, you know? And so I think we've all experienced bad chatbots. And so a lot of folks have kind of this negative connotation of chatbots. And that's based on what you said is there's a pre-configured. Maybe they've guessed at first, maybe they've collected it off data, maybe they're trying to solve burden on their help desk based on phone call questions that they get all the time. But either way, there's a pre-configured list of common questions and common answers. And there's a triage of steps that you can select to be able to try to get to your solution. And they have to generalize these buckets for you to follow through to try to get to your
Which is
solution.
today, yeah.
Yeah. And
A workflow.
it's it can be frustrating when what you need is not being met through those pre-configured buckets. So an AI enabled chatbot, just take it one step further, is able to come up with responses. Let's just say a large language model enabled chatbot, right? Is able to come up with responses and handle questions that may slightly deviate from the norm. Actually, could handle questions that completely deviate from the norm, right? Um, and so this is where you're able to provide a bit more of a human experience.
And
Like,
when you say deviate from the norm, what do you mean by that?
so let's see, like, yeah, I guess, like, if I were to ask a question that is not worded properly, um, in the past we have search, right? You can search based on keywords or letters. There's take it one step further, something called fuzzy search. Fuzzy search is if you accidentally misspell something, um, it's gonna search for the thing that you typed and then also search for any small variance things. And that's how you're able to that's how we've all become used to search. It's like, I don't really have to worry about spelling this thing right. I'll probably get it right.
Mhm.
Um, so taking it a little bit further with like once we started using things like vector embeddings, which is what's behind like large language models, now it's not tables and rows in a spreadsheet, question, answer. And it's also not tables and rows and some slight deviations of letters. It's vector embeddings are a multi-dimensional matrix. It's not. It's almost hard. Almost impossible, if not impossible, for us to wrap our brains around the idea of 10,000 dimensions at once. Right, 10,000 different
Scenarios
scenarios.
that come
Oh,
up with a question.
yeah. Like
Yeah.
it's not even just height,
Yeah.
width, depth anymore. Like it's hard. I'm falling apart trying to even explain it. You
Yeah.
know. So with vector embeddings, it's you can kind of imagine it as like a three-dimensional or four-dimensional space. And when we dump a bunch of text-based data in there, it's the how common these little chunks or snippets of text come up. So the letter, if I were to say, "Hi, my name is Jesse," HI space might be a chunk that gets created. MY space J might be a chunk that gets created. ESSE might become a chunk that gets created. And how many times those chunks come up together? How often does ESSE come up? Well, generally it only comes up when he's saying the word Giuseppe or Jesse. So they start getting clustered. And so what Vertex embeddings do is they essentially assign a coordinated position of that little chunk. And as you have enough data, these chunks they get close together and become related to each other more and in more and more special ways. So if I dump a bunch of text in the dictionary, the resulting vector map is probably going to have a lot of things that start with A, a lot of things that start with B, a lot of things that start with C, because that's the corpus that it was fed. It's also going to be able to, based on the definitions, form relationships of, these are all things related to water. These are all things related to farming. These are all things related to history. Like, these clusters of topics form. And it can get really complicated very quickly for me to try to, in one conversation, explain all the different relationships that the dictionary has with itself.
Sure.
Recursively, right? Vector embeddings make it a lot easier to work with this stuff. It's based on like frequency of these chunks. So if you think of things like that, let me get back to a normal question that you were asking. I can ask it anything. And based on the words that I'm asking it, and there's a certain amount of context that it's able to extract at a base level to be able to then determine a response. Next, you have like temperature, variance. You're able to tweak these different parameters. I don't want to go too deep here. And I also don't want to look like an idiot to someone who's even more technical than me, but you're able to kind of tweak in these sliders, essentially, is the best way to put it, that determine how creative the response should be versus how literal it should be. And so you're really always at a trade-off of accuracy and creativity. I'm a chart right now. I'm a chart. So you're always, there's a trade-off between accuracy and creativity. If you want 100% accuracy, you're at 0% creativity. And finding the balance there with the language model is what results in the thing being able to produce an intelligent response. Now, that's just words. That's just response. It's not even action. To take it one step further, I know I've been talking a while, is not only can it respond with language, but it's able to perform tasks. Oh, it sounds like what you're asking for is a human. Before I get you over to a human, could you tell me what's troubling you today? Well, my internet keeps going out. Okay, do you mind if I troubleshoot? Nope, you've already troubleshoot 6 times. Can you please give me a human being? I'm going to troubleshoot. That's how my call with Xfinity went yesterday. I could not get a human being. Couldn't. I say, I'm going to troubleshoot. I then called and said, hey, I would like to talk to a human. It said, I'm aware that we're currently troubleshooting for you. We need you to wait 10 minutes. It would not let me get to a person because it knew the chatbot I was talking to is currently running a troubleshooting for me. Right. This is saving their help desk a tremendous amount of burden for someone like me who's extremely upset that my internet keeps going out. And it's forcing me to wait to go through. I'll tell you what, every single time the chatbot ran a prefix on my internet, it fixed it. And I'd be like, okay, yeah, it worked. But then my internet would go back out later. It's 2 hours later. I kept going through this cycle. It was horrible. Eventually, I got a person, right? I had to keep going through these buttons. It would not let me give it a creative response. Sorry, I didn't understand that. Sorry, I don't understand what you're meaning. Can you please tell me which one of these it is? When you have enough wiggle room of creativity, I'm able to converse. And yes, I can say expletives. And yes, I can get really upset. And I can say my internet keeps going out. And I'm yelling at this bot because it's not a person. And whatever it is, but it's able to decipher what actually it is that I'm asking for, and then take me to the right next step, right?
So can I put it in layman first? That's the difference. So in the beginning, it's the workflow. If this, then that. That's all we have. The AI enabled, actually, it's AI that has a trained large language model. We're training it, so it's fine tuning to the actual information that customer service or people would call customer service for. So by the time you ask the question, you're actually going to get the responses that you're seeking versus trying to go through the rigmarole of everything that you just shared. Right?
And from a business perspective, you want to be able to capture value from questions that get asked that were not previously in your FAQs. If your users are all calling all at the same time saying that they can't log in, and it's a spike in that type of call, there's probably something wrong with your system, right? Like, you're able to extract immediate insights that way.
And fix the product or fix the solution and fix the problem. Yeah. And and it's continuously learning.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more questions that come in, the more answers that it's receiving that are satisfying the customer, and your service delivery numbers, the results are better, which
Mm-hmm.
then will result in better brand outcomes. The third part of this, and I think this is where it's always been interesting for me, is like that's possible today, right? So we're going from the what if, the if then that model, right? That structure, to something that has more fine-tuned
Flexibility.
machine learning, more precision in terms of answers, to in the future, that this is something that, you and I chat about. It's not there yet, right? But like over time, say I was on the MailChimp website and I was talking to the chatbot and the internet goes out and you're like, oh shit, I got to start over, right? But the internet comes back on, it knows who am I at that moment, because there's some sort of, there's a multimodality behind
Mm-hmm.
understanding not only my identity, but if I was working on any other brand asset of that company, maybe I'm on X, or maybe, there's other ways to interact with it. They would know who I am
Mm-hmm.
from the beginning. I'm not starting fresh, because there's that insight, the memory that's associated to the AI. And I think so. The whole point of that example was to show the power and the change that's going to happen, both from a business side and the customer sort of experience,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so for you as a CEO or a founder or someone, when you're thinking about like, how do we make our business different today? It's always about the experiences that you're creating and what people, when you talk about brand and brand equity, like that's what you're creating. You're
Mm-hmm.
creating these tech-enabled, on the back end, tech-enabled opportunities so that people feel a certain way about your brand. You're making life easier, more convenient for them, right? Um,
Well, it's one thing to have like a chatbot, right? It's another thing to have a chatbot that can handle unexpected situations conversationally. It's another thing to have, and like we kind of skipped some there, is like RAG. We should talk about RAG.
sure, yeah, let's talk
Okay.
about RAG.
So retrieval augmented generation, so RAG, right? Um, what's great about a RAG agent is it's if you take that chatbot that we talked about that can handle things and return text responses, a RAG agent is able to kind of act more like a librarian. So we can't pass the entire dictionary through this chatbot prompt every single time I want to ask it a question, right? That's a lot. It can get really expensive. It's also going to start to lose some things. It's like if you throw everything in the kitchen sink in, and then you're asking it to specialize, you might get a good answer. But when a model is trained specifically on financial data and looking for fraud inside of spreadsheets, you start to get more and more narrow. That thing, if I were to feed it a spreadsheet from an SEC data set, or feed it an SEC data set and say, take a look at this, and based on our work, identify potential fraudsters, a specialized model is going to do a much better job than a generalized model generally, right?
Mm-hmm.
So RAG is kind of like having a librarian. If I want to ask this agent a question that it doesn't expect and it doesn't immediately have an answer, I don't want it to just return a response. That's what chatbots are programmed to do. And that's what large language models are programmed to do, is to give you a answer to your question. This is where things like hallucination comes in, which CEOs and C-suite executives do fear, right? Like you don't want to just put some AI out there that's going to wind up telling people to harm themselves or do something illegal or immoral or unsafe, and have you end up on the front page of the paper because you were trying to alleviate help desk burden. So RAG allows this agent essentially to load, like a librarian, relevant information into its knowledge and go fetch that knowledge. This might be that it has access to a corpus of company data. It might be that it's able to access a Google Drive that has all of your winning proposals in it. But either way, RAG allows it to fetch and load information. It could be through APIs. So kind of like, Zapier, what Zapier has been doing for us for many, many years. Pair that now with the chatbot and the language model, its ability to communicate with us. And now you've got something that can respond to shifting requirements and give intelligent responses. The last step, which I'm sure there's many more, but is what you were actually just talking about, is a little bit closer to AGI, but it's an agent that can answer questions and provide value. It can converse in a way that I want to communicate and handle unexpected questions. It can load relevant knowledge into its corpus of data, and it can perform tasks, right? that's when you've got essentially yourself a junior hire out of school. You got something that it can do all those things, not just talk, not just find information, but also perform tasks and actually create value. And so that's the art of creating an AI agent. And it really just starts with making a selection, measuring and fine tuning along the way.
So is RAG the answer to hallucinations?
Oh, wow. It's my fix right now for hedging my bets, I would
Yeah.
say. It's hard to say what the ultimate fix for hallucinations is to make it so that your temperature provides absolutely no creativity. Um, that does serve a purpose for some people, maybe lawyers, but other than that, I think we all want a little bit of creativity in there so that we're not all pumping out the same content.
All the time. Okay. So I'm looking at my iPhone because I'm like 90, you talk about that can become your junior analyst,
Mm,
right? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to talk about the future of work for a second because I just read in the World Economic Forum 2025 report on future work that 92 million jobs are going to be lost due to AI driven automations, and efficiency, right? Kind of a lot of what we've been talking about. 170 million new jobs are going to be created in this space, right, over the next couple of years
mm,
from, different opportunities for careers and entrepreneurship and augmentation, right? And then so that's a net gain of 78 million jobs, right?
mhm.
So like what would you say? Like, where do you think are some of the best opportunities if I was just starting like in the workforce or
Mhm.
like what should the CEOs be thinking about new sort of roles that they should
Uh,
ensure that they, start to think
yeah.
through?
So this will be kind of speculative,
Yeah, of
but
course.
I think I feel confident. um, I think we're going to see people get hired as prompt engineers, and so specifically about what I mean from that, and this is a great like entry level job, I think. And you can get super advanced. I know very advanced prompt engineers. That's what they do, and they make great money. So what these folks do is they are crafting the prompt or the way that you engage with the language model in the first place. So this might be saying something like, you are a content writer in my business development department who is tasked with reviewing RFIs and determining the about, the why, the initial personas, and the apparent key objectives. Um, that's me giving it a prompt. And anyone who's ever used ChatGPT, you've done prompt engineering. If you've ever sent it a message and then found, oh, that didn't work, I want to try it a different way, and you've edited, if you've ever edited did a previous response, you're doing prompt engineering. And so there's a tremendous amount of value for folks who know how to get these semi unpredictable language models to act more predictably. And I think that goes both from text as well as creating images and video. There are folks who they use AI as their medium, but they actually have a style of their own. And you're able to tell, I can kind of tell like, oh, that's, that's, it's got to be this person. And sure enough, it is like, oh, that's something from the Fediverse. And he literally used AI to make it, but I can tell it's Null who made it, so we are seeing individuality come out of the usage of AI for creating art. And it's in many ways because people have found their flavor of prompt engineering. So that's the first. I'll pause though, because I have more.
No, please. I want to hear more.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So aside from people who can do prompt engineering, there's going to be folks who can spin up and build agents, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be some super whiz coder. It might be using off the shelf tools, it might be using something like Crew AI, um, or even creating like a GPT or a Gem, which is Google's version. Um, there's a lot of tools that are out there that we're going to see people become very proficient with, just like Photoshop, right? We were hiring, people. I remember it was like a big deal when Photoshop like came out, and a lot of folks who were photographers were like pumped about what they could do with their images, but other folks were kind of threatened by the fact that you could create images. It felt like cheating again, right? Um, and so I think as we're going to see kind of those tools emerge the AI version of these tools emerge, there's going to be an opportunity for people to get hired who simply know how to spin up and build baseline task agents, what we were referring to earlier, that can do things and speed up processes. One step further than that, I would say, is going to be folks who, yeah, they can code. They've been maybe a front end engineer their whole life. They can build applications, but now because of technologies or frameworks like LangChain and Hugging Face, they've found a way to AI enable the applications that they're building. Um, so it's going to be about finding engineers, but not just engineers who know, you know, very like everything, but it's going to be more about folks who know how to actually use these tools, much like when folks started using APIs to accelerate and ship useful software products. The last thing I'll bring up is folks who know how to is models. So I think folks, yeah, your data scientists take that to the next level with AI. Is folks who not only know how to select models, but also know how to create models and fine tune models. This is again is where I believe the majority of your IP is going to come from over the course of the next 2 years, especially is where companies are starting to generate their own useful models that they can again either choose to keep as their own secret sauce or license out for the world.
Yeah. I think there's another side. You talk a lot about the technical side, and I think there's going to be lots of roles that are managing
Mm.
agents and people, and leadership is going to change in that way. I mean, I just got asked to be on, as you know, like the future of work council for JFF Labs. So this is going to be a really interesting topic. And the more I work through that with this working group, I'm going to share on this podcast because I think there's so much of an opportunity to understand where roles are going because upskilling is going to be a big piece and literacy. So let's chat about that for a few minutes
Okay.
because I think, one of the things that we keep hearing with a lot of the folks that we're talking to is the need to upskill their employee base and, get them not only to a certain extent of AI literacy, so the foundations, but also convert their companies into making these employees like innovators,
Hmm.
right? Because, we talked a lot about the prompt engineering and getting to an actual agent. But now, if you start to train your folks just to identify how do you even think about these like task oriented, high intense time sucking things that, we do on a repetitive basis that we could convert into an AI agent. What it's allowing you to do is change your culture into more of an innovation culture.
Hmm.
And I think that, and I'm just curious on your side, how important is AI literacy for employees? And how does leadership go about something like that?
Yeah, so I think leadership needs a very clear goal, right? Again, and it's you should get a litmus test first of all. Like, where are your people at? Do they love AI, fear AI? Do they understand it? Um, Having an understanding of like where people are at with it is going to be a take you far, and I think a lot of executives or companies overall skip that step in the effort of trying to be helpful. Um, I think furthermore, you've got to like you bring me back to your question so I can stay
Yeah,
focused.
no, in
Good
terms of
question though.
literacy from,
Oh,
the importance of literacy and the approach to it, right? Because I think there are many leaders that are in a place that I always, talk about like this, like make sure yourself as a CEO
mhm,
understands not just the fundamentals, but like what this technology can actually do, because that's where innovation gets unlocked, right?
mhm,
Without the CEO and the C-suite sort of understanding those fundamentals. And then we go into the employees, right? Because, we also know, let's just be real, that their jobs are going to be lost,
mhm,
right? And we also know that most visionaries in this space, and we say it now all the time, like Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, says, it's not about AI taking your job. It's about people who understand and know how to use AI that we're going to take your job. So there is this
yeah.
new initiative around AI literacy that's important for leadership.
Yeah. So, and that brought me back. Thank you. So it's not just about like, yeah. So first of all, you have to understand where they're at now, so you can measure and see if there's any improvement. You got to be able to build trust. That's the point that was escaping me. Like, people have to trust using the tools. They have to trust that the tools aren't going to be used against them as well. Like, if I come up with a novel way to accelerate creating proposals and scoping deals, using AI that allows me to save 90% of my time, at least for a short term, my life is pretty good. I'm saving 90% of my time, and that's 90% more time I have to do other things I want to do. But eventually, it becomes the norm. And that 90% of time is company time. Company wants that. We want that. So, what you're probably going to wind up seeing inevitably, which kind of stinks, is us continue to squeeze as much productivity as we can out of our workers and start expecting, oh, it should only take you a tenth the amount of time because you have AI. So if I'm a employee at any company who's been given AI tools and told, hey, use AI for your work and tell me how you're using it, I need to trust that it's not going to result in me needing to do 10 times the work for the same amount of money, or that it's not going to result in me losing my job because we found a way to automate all the processes and things that I do. People, I think something that we do in business that's funny is we pretend like we don't all have families at home. And we pretend like we don't all have ambition to move ahead and advance in this world. Um, it's all like, that's like the one weird veil of bullshit that we all have to go through in this world. It's like we talk about the aspirational who we want to be. We accept each other as you are. It's assumed positive intent, but we don't ever actually acknowledge the fact that you have a family at home and I have a family at home, and your partner wants you to advance as far in this world as you possibly can, and you have aspirations as well. We pretend like that doesn't exist. So I say all that to say that if there's even a hint that giving you as an executive the answer to the question of how I'm using AI to augment my work, if there's an even hint that it's going to result in me losing my job, I'm not going to tell you that answer. So your people have to trust you, and I think if you can't achieve that level of trust, you're not going to get the honest feedback that you need.
It's a hard place for leaders to be, right? Because they can't. It's like a chicken or the egg,
Mhm.
right? And so again, I think one of the things, going back to the earlier part of the conversation, where it's not about going and like taking 30% of your FTEs and just saying, "Hey, AI is automating and I'm out." It's now reassessing your people.
Mhm.
If they were very good at customer service, maybe they'll be good at sales. Like, it's like there's a whole new world of organizational change management that is going to play a critical role when it comes to the future work, and just the way that career paths are driven, our career paths are made, right? And I think you're right. Like, it isn't about, hey, let's this AI augment your staff and give it a superpower and expect 10x more from them. I think there's going to be a transition over the years of like what is expected in certain roles, because over time, again, intelligent businesses are going to be the norm.
Mhm.
So coming into something that's the norm, yes, your expectations are going to be different because you already have the tools, right? And that's just going to, like my kids, I have a 10 and 15-year-old. They're going to walk into jobs that are, already baseline automated.
Yeah,
Like,
AI
they're not
enabled.
even gonna think about it's automated. It's just done. It's normal,
Mhm.
right? So I think there is, to your point, there are gonna be several years of this like, ugh, they're making me do more. And it's every emerging tech cycle has that. So
Mhm.
that is something leaders are gonna have to deal with.
I was at the dentist today,
Mm.
and a short story, I promise. The hygienist that was cleaning my teeth, she shared with me that she's like, "Oh, I was just using our AI," and she asked me what I do, right? Because I was just using our AI. She says, "I got to be honest. I was really skeptical when they told me that we were going to have an AI tool help us read X-rays." I was like, "I'm not. What's that AI know? It's not going to be able to tell me anything." She said, "But I love it. It is extremely useful." And I was told her, I was like, "I'm going to use that today." Like it, the dentist, the dental hygienist is not somebody you probably think is going to have AI. She doesn't have to write emails to me. She doesn't have to read a bunch of emails and fill any of these examples that we've talked about. It's a pretty complex task of reading X-rays, right? It's not something you think of at first. And even for her, she was a super doubter, but now she's found that she, can't really imagine not having this acceleration to identifying potential problems within X-rays. She still has to read them the old-fashioned way. She still has to check and audit. She's not just putting the hope and faith into AI to do all the work, but it can catch things that she doesn't see, and it can help accelerate and speed up her ability to read these things.
Well,
So,
you just brought up really two important points, and this is for every leader to understand. Once you show people what generative AI tools or just AI tools can do, and then that actually takes a lot of the fear out of the formula, right? Or out of the calculation, because they're like, oh my God, I don't have to do that
mhm,
anymore. Like, and I go back to oh shit, aha moments, because it's those moments that will, once again, people can feel and touch something and play with it. And that's why prototyping and doing these like sprints are so important, because then that culture of innovation gets embraced,
mhm,
right? And they're like, oh man, like this is so cool. I wish, I can't tell you how many people after ChatGPT, after years of like, not year, well, I guess a couple years of telling them, use it, use it, use it. Eventually
yeah,
they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I can't live without this thing,
yeah,
right? So that was one really important thing. And I think like, the employees, there was another piece that you mentioned, and I'm just trying to get back to that core point. I'm
mhm,
like, but I just think there is such a, there's going to be a shift. There's going to be a major shift in culture. The more people can touch and feel things, because then they're going to start to be able to innovate in themselves. Oh, I
mhm,
do this more often, and this is something that maybe can be also, translated into some sort of AI system or something. The other thing that came back to me was the radiologist in that example. All of a sudden, they're going to say, hey, wow, I might, to your point, like I didn't catch that. I didn't know. That's a big deal, right?
mhm.
But also humans are still in the loop.
Yep,
And
definitely.
this is a huge, huge thing, right? There's still Q&A,
Yep,
QA, right? Quality assurance. They still, now they have data. They have, wow, this is actually what's going on. They still have to review it.
yep,
And then they still have to talk to the patient. Now they can spend more time in terms of using bedside manner with the patient and
mhm,
talking about what they actually see, instead of having taken the 15 minutes to try to figure it out. And that is the difference, because now that patient is going to feel like, wow, they care about me. They gave me a very in-depth, detailed, analysis on my x-ray, whatever it may be. But that is the anchor I want you guys to go in thinking,
yeah,
is that's the difference in internal experiences and external experiences,
mhm,
right? I want to go into one more topic and then kind of talk about this modern day business framework before we close out here. Responsible AI,
mm,
right? That's a big buzzword. Everyone like talks about like, well, what does it mean? Is it important? Are there regulations around it? And, obviously we're in a different sort of administration, really heavily focused on winning the AI race. And, I think we can have a whole different conversation on that and what that means, because
yeah,
it's really important
yep,
actually. And I totally understand what this country's doing and what other countries are trying to do. But EU has always been more focused on these frameworks and regulations before we are in the US, right? So EU with GDPR was like the privacy and sort of core things when marketing, emails, and all that stuff came out. So there were a lot of rules, and then, different parts of the world took over. The responsible AI, we're getting a lot of questions from C-suite. Is like, what do we teach our people? What should be in those policies? I always go back to like, we want to make sure we've learned from different cycles. So you are not in the news 2 years from now when regulations catch up and they decide to take the 5 companies that have been doing it wrong and put them on a pedestal, just like they did with, FTX and Web3, and they were doing it wrong, right? But don't be that company. like,
yeah.
So your perspective on responsible AI, and what are some thoughts there?
I think it sounds like fluff for some folks like myself, who, like, I try to stay away from fluffy words. And to answer one of the questions you had in there of like how relevant or important it is, it's very important, which is why it's not just. I wish it didn't just sound like a nice fluffy buzzword. When we talk about responsible AI, it's about understanding the impact that using these technologies is going to have on your business and your stakeholders, on your staff and your employees, and on the people that you ultimately serve, your end users or whoever those folks are. And ideally, also the impact on the world as well. But frankly, that is not a fiduciary responsibility of a for-profit company. So hopefully they think about those four, but at very least they're thinking about the first three. When you think about responsible AI, it's important to understand, like, are you displacing jobs? Are you is this going to affect your hiring strategy in the future? Are you going to have to perform layoffs? Responsible AI is not, how do we not lay anybody off? Let me make that very clear. Like, nobody owes you anything because you can do design and you have been a great designer and you took boot camps and you've taught courses. Nobody owes you anything. We don't have to keep you, right? Nobody has to keep the engineers and developers that they have. You had a really great run. You made more money than your friends. Your job was really sticky, but technology has changed. Like, you have to come to terms with that. So being responsible AI doesn't mean that you just arbitrarily get to keep things the way that they are. It's about having an understanding of the impact and making the decision, informed decision, of when and where to use it and when and how you're going to make these cuts or changes.
Yeah, I look at it also as more of what the innovation that's driven from the AI-enabled solutions, that can you create ethical and clean data models,
Mm.
right? Compared to what, in the past, data can be really dirty.
Mhm.
Like, let's just be honest, right? Like, and if you're working off of creating models that are dirty, and call them dirty because they're just maybe like, whatever that looks like, whatever that means to you, right? But that means the outcome of the precision or wherever the decisions that you're making or the insights that you're gleaning from this data is not it might be bias,
Mm.
right? It may, have issues with ethics, like, and think about redlining and real estate and mortgages, right? Like, it's like that type of stuff that, with innovation comes implication. And I think that's a really important thing for leaders to understand. So 100%, there's the part of it on the employee and employment side. But I think, for responsible AI and frameworks around it, it really is about what you're creating with, being intentional and teaching your employees that even as you're building an innovation culture within your own company, they need to be thinking about these things because, again, 3 years from now, you don't want to be in the news, right?
Yeah, you're right. And actually, I've got notes here in Catterley that you made me think of, and that I did want to touch on that are related to this question. So it's like, yeah, you got to understand the regulatory compliance, right? You got to be able to ensure that, like, what you're building actually adheres to GDPR, right? When we have the GDPR of AI from the EU, it's going to have the same impact on many different companies. Whether you live in Europe or not, it's probably going to have a major impact on you when those policies roll out. So you need to be aware of them. Ethical considerations, we touched on that, right? See, Catterley has my notes. So data security, we touched on that, right? Talk about clean data, but also you don't want to have your data get overexposed or by implementing AI agents into your workforce, you're actually creating new attack vectors if you're not careful. If a nefarious actor who's let's call him a dark prompt engineer, right? Like the dark side of prompt engineering is able to inject a certain prompt into your chatbot that makes it reveal information that it was not supposed to. This can happen. It sounds like science fiction. It could totally happen. People jailbreak models every day. If you want, look it up on X or Twitter, and you'll be able to see what people are doing that models are not supposed to be able to do. Integration and scalability. So be aware of how you are integrating. If you're a company with a product that has an open API layer that other companies depend on in order to deliver value to their users, and you slap some AI in there and it winds up screwing up your entire data structures, or suddenly your API is not able to be worked with, this can have major implications and disruptions downstream. So just understanding your place within the ecosystem, cost and ROI, and then of course, user experience and trust. At the end of the day, responsible AI requires that you have an understanding of how it's not just going to impact your bottom line, but also impact, again, your end users and the trust in your ability to continue to provide value.
Yeah, and I think this is part of the point, right? It's like these relevant, personalized solutions that are solving real business problems. So that was a business problem
Mhm.
internally at Virgin. And so really cool to see you develop that and use it as a tool that has increased productivity and efficiency.
Yeah.
And more, but also like, that, and I think goes back to like, don't just slap AI on it because that's what we're getting pressured to do, focus on the things that are really going to move your business and move your customers forward.
Yeah, I couldn't use, I'll give you like backstory real quick. I could not use a tool I like to use, called HackMD. Check out HackMD. It's an open source, semi-open source tool that's out there, but their data centers are based in, I think, Taiwan, and that doesn't fly with some of my clients. I do a lot of consulting, right? We work with government and commercial, and so had a problem that my second brain, has been living in this app for years. I take notes every single day, and so in 48 hours, because of Cursor, I was able to build my own self-hosted notes app that had all the features I love from HackMD. And then I spent 2-3 months enabling it with other features that I could only ever dream of. And this became addicting. And you're going to see it as a trend for a lot of people. Is now I find myself every week asking, what SaaS tool can I eliminate and stop paying $20 a month for? So far, every tool that I have eliminated has gone from $20 a month to $2 a month. And so as people who are savvy like myself, and more people become savvy because of these tools, we're going to see people building their own bespoke solutions to their problems, and instead of paying, the 1,000 subscriptions that they've signed up for.
Yeah, listen, that's a great way to just segue because look, we're here with AI because there's this new world that is enabling us to create innovations. And I don't like the word easy. It's easier in a sense of like it's actually accessible, right? It's possible. We're redefining what is actually possible, and every company has that opportunity right now. And the reason I created this particular podcast and rebranded is because we want to start to share, what people are working on today so you understand like what the technology can do today, where it's headed, where currently, as you're struggling with all these pain points with like innovation, with employment, with responsibility, with, all the things that are every day coming out in the news, like DeepSeek. We didn't even touch on that, right? Like
Yeah.
these are real things that, you're going to be grappling with consistently because we're at the beginning part of the cycle, and it is starting to cross the chasm in many ways. And yes, CEOs, leaders, like founders, everyone's getting the pressure to use it. But I'm hoping that this podcast with the guests that I'm going to bring on, both on the expert side, the additional CEOs, the head of data and AI, we're going to be able to make this into more layman, not too technical. So you start to understand how to use this to your benefit, for the betterment of society, the betterment of your consumers and your customers, and be able to really take this moment in time that we're never going to see again, and never going to see again, and be one of the brands that really stands out, that's doing it right, right? And that's what this is all about. So with that, thank you for joining us on our first episode of the AI CEO podcast. Thank you, Jesse Alton, for being with me and
Thanks for
sharing
having
some
me.
of your insights. And I look forward to the next episode. Thank you. That's a wrap for this episode of the AI CEO podcast. If you found today's conversation valuable, don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. It helps me reach more leaders like you and continue bringing in top AI first founders, industry experts, and visionary CEOs to share their insights. AI is evolving fast, and the CEOs who harness it today will lead tomorrow. Stay ahead of the curve, keep learning, and keep building. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.